It's a gray, rainy Sunday, but I decided it would be a good day to pull out one of my UFOs, get it basted, and finish it. This is a potato chip quilt that I had made, and I had considered adding another row of 3 blocks, but I had a piece of batting that was just big enough if I left it in the 3x3 layout. So I went ahead and ironed my flimsy really well, and then I basted it with my scrap batting, my backing fabric, which is pink and purple clouds, and then I spray basted with 505 spray glue, and then I added a few safety pins for good measure. I decided to quilt this on my Bernina by switching to a darning foot that allows me to do free motion. So when you put that foot on your machine, you need to drop your feed dogs down. I like to also wear these gardening gloves that I picked up from Ross. They just help give me a little bit of grip, and then I do a meander with loops. And I've tried a few other free motion quilting pattern designs, but this is one that I feel like I can work from edge to edge of a quilt, and I've finished a few quilts this way, just doing a meander, a looping meander. When I basted my quilt top to the batting and backing, I left about a 2-inch border of batting material as overlap, and then about another 2 inches beyond that of the backing fabric. And all of that will get trimmed off once I have it quilted. Now I'm doing the quilting free motion, and I ended up choosing an Ivory glide thread. I laid several different thread options out to see which one I would like better. I really thought I was going to go with a corally pink, but it had a lot of contrast with some of the teals and blues, and ultimately I decided that I liked the ivory color thread the best. Picking a quilting thread is sometimes a hard decision because you have to decide, do you want a lot of contrast? Do you want it to kind of blend in? I tend to like the lighter colors better for the quilting, but I almost went with a pink or a coral colored thread today. It was a tough decision. I would love to one day own a long arm machine. Right now, my options for finishing quilts are either to do some type of free motion like what I'm doing right now, or to put on a walking foot and do straight or diagonal lines, or to send it to someone who has a long arm, but that can get kind of pricey, and so it's a little cost prohibitive for finishing quilts, although I have done that a few times. Let me know in the comments, what is your preferred way to get a quilt top actually finished? My plan of attack for this quilt was to start along one edge and then sort of work back and forth about 3 to 4 inches up, basically a row, and then go back down. And so right now I've gone all the way to one edge and I'm working back towards the far edge. Everything to my right, your left, has already been quilted, and so I'm about halfway done at this point. Because this was a smaller child size quilt, and because I had used some of the 505 spray glue, I don't have a ton of safety pins, but I do have a few. And so when I get to one, I have my machine set to leave the needle down, so I can stop in the middle of a loop or a swirl with the needle down and just stop and remove safety pins as I get to them. And like I said, because of the spray glue and just the smaller size of this project, I didn't feel it necessary to use a whole ton of safety pins. A personal goal of mine is to finish all of my UFOs by the end of the year. I did a video a little while back showing that I had about 12 unfinished object projects that are in different stages of being completed, and I'm really trying to clean up my sewing room, finish projects that have been lingering, because it's always easy to buy more fabric and start a new project, but I'm really trying to discipline myself to finish things that I've already started. And to clean and organize my sewing space. So I've been recently going through a lot of my scrap fabrics, which is one of the reasons why I had this potato chip quilt top done, is because that was a project that I made with quite a few scrap fabrics left over from other projects. I did a whole video where I made these quilt blocks, and it's a great way to use up scraps. One of the things I found when I was recently cleaning and organizing in my sewing room was leftover binding strips. So for larger quilts that I've made, I had made a ton of binding strips, and I actually had in my stash quite a bit of pink binding strips. And so I didn't have to cut or make binding for this project, because as I was cleaning over the last few weeks, I found some binding that I already had prepared and ready. So that's going to make it really easy to finish this today. I know there's lots of different methods for making binding. The way that I've been making mine is to cut strips 2.5 inches wide times length of fabric, and then join the ends, and then iron them in half with the back side of the fabric touching, so you have the pretty side out, and that's how I prepare my binding strips. And then I like to just kind of roll them up. And when I was cleaning my sewing room, I actually found several different colors and lots of different scrap bindings. So I have a whole giant gallon-sized Ziploc bag full of binding strips ready to go on projects now. So that was an exciting find. Once I am satisfied that it's all been quilted and I don't have any large areas that didn't get stitched, that I filled it all in nicely, the next step is to trim off all this extra. I have about anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of overhang from when I was basting. So I'm going to use my long ruler and my rotary blade, and I'm just going to trim along the sides. I've heard people call this squaring up the quilt. I'm not really as concerned about if it's like perfectly square as just that I trim off everything that's not part of the quilt top. And I do try to get the edges as straight as possible. The better job you do trimming, the easier it is to put on your binding. This is what I have learned. And so I do try to get it as straight as possible, as I know this will make it easier to put the binding on. And I do not do any hand binding. I do all of the binding on the machine. That's just the way that I learned, and that's the way that I've been doing it. Okay, that is looking really nice. I love the backing. To me, it looks like cotton candy clouds. Okay, time for binding. I like to give myself about an 8-inch tail, and I like to start close to one corner. This is just what I've been doing for attaching binding. I like to start by machine sewing it to the back, and then later I'll flip it over and stitch it down to the front also with the machine. And I use my number 1 foot, and then I can adjust the needle to the left or the right depending on which part of the binding process I'm in. And this is not a tutorial on binding. There are tutorials that are just specifically on how to do binding. This is just showing how I'm getting my UFOs done. And I can tell from this angle how messy my table is, and that needs to get cleaned up today too. I was happy to get this project finished, and I got my daughter to come outside with me and be my quilt holder. That's a very important job, is who's going to hold the quilt for the picture at the end. And today it was my middle daughter, and so I'm thankful for her help today. And she's a good little quilt holder. I hope y'all have a blessed weekend. Happy quilting.